أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Alhamdulillah. So the last time we covered Najaasat. We discussed the categorization of Najaasat. If anybody can remember, they can remind us how many types of Najaasat there were. Yes, there were 2 types of Najaasat, right? So since I was able to write it down last time, I can write it on this time, just to make it easier for us, to make it simpler. Najaasat is of 2 types, right? And again, what is the meaning of Najaasat?
Filth or impurity.
Yes, filth or impurity. So we categorized it into 2 types. What was one of the 2 types? What was the Arabic? One of them was Hukmi, okay. Hukmi?
And then Haqiqi.
Yes, and then Haqiqi. So what does this mean? What are...
One which can be seen and the other one.
Yes, one is this Haqiqi is an Arabic word. It translates into Haqiqat Daluli means reality. So Najaasat Haqiqi is a Najaasat which can be visibly seen, right? Like for example urine, that falls under this category. Najaasat al-Hukmi is not a Najaasat or an impurity which can be seen. It's a state of impurity. You're in a state of impurity. And we discussed each one of these. They also break down into 2 types, right? So you have Haqiqi, which breaks up into 2 types, and you have Hukmi, which also is of 2 types. So let's start with the Hukmi. What were the 2 types of Hukmi we discussed? Yes. One was Hadath Asghar. And again, Hadath is technically you could say it's a synonym of Najaasat. Hadath also means impurity. Asghar means a small impurity. You could say, so you're in a state of minor impurity, right? That's one of the Hadath Asghar. What was the example of being in a state of Hadath Asghar? A minor impurity? Yes, when you don't have wudu. So if you break your wudu, for example, you start bleeding, the blood starts flowing. So you broke your wudu. Right now you're in a state of Hadath Asghar, right? You don't have wudu. So one of the 2 types was Hadath Asghar. The other type was, yes, Akbar. Hadath Akbar, which means major impurity. The major impurity, when a person is in a state of Hadath Akbar, then that means he has to perform ghusl, right? Or you could say junub, right? Major impurity. The person was in a state of major impurity. He has to perform ghusl. And we mentioned those things which necessitate ghusl. Right? The Hadath Asghar is when a person needs to perform wudu. Haqiqi also breaks up into 2 types. So we can mention one of the 2 types of Najaasat Haqiqi. You can remind us, anybody? Yes, one of those was Khafifa. Khafifa means light, right? A light impurity. We give examples of light impurities as well. The droppings of haram birds, for example, birds that you're not allowed to eat. The droppings of those birds is Najaasat Khafifa, right? The urine of animals which you are allowed to eat, for example, the urine of cows, of goats, of sheep, these fall under the category of Khafifa, right? A light impurity. And on the other side, what did we have? If this one was light impurity, then this one was the heavy impurity, right? The term for Arabic, the term in Arabic was Ghalidha, right? So again, I'll just put the English here. Hukmi was again a state of impurity. Haqiqi is visible impurity. So then you had Khafifa, which was the light impurity, and Ghalila, which was the heavy impurity, right? And again, Hadith al-Asghar, minor state of impurity. And Hadith al-Akbar was major state of impurity. This pretty much covers the whole topic of Najaasat, right? This is the main portion of Najaasat. We have Najaasat impurities. That breaks into two types. Haqiqi, visible impurity, right? For example, like urine, feces, blood. That's visible impurity. And then you have hukmi, being in a state of impurity, right? Like, for example, you don't have wudu, or you're in a state where ghusl becomes farad on you. Each of these break into two types. You have the ghaliza, the heavy impurity. For example, the urine of the human being, the feces of the human being, and then you have khafifa, the light impurity, right? Which is for example, the urine of animals which are halal to eat, right? And also we discussed hukmi, right? Hadith akbar and hadith asghar. Now the rulings for these two differ. In terms of purifying, najasat, ghaliza, a heavy impurity, how would you purify that? Or you could say, what amount is allowed for you to pray with, and what amount is not allowed for you to pray with? They differ, both of these, in regards to that. What was the amount if this amount gets on your body or on your clothes, it becomes necessary to wash off?
50-cent coin.
Yes, the size of a dirham. A dirham is about the size of a 50-cent coin, right? So if that amount of najasat ghaliza gets on your clothes, for example, if urine gets on your clothes, and it's equal to or more than the size of a 50-cent coin, then you will have to wash that off, right? How would you wash it off? Yes, you would wash it 3 times, right? And we discussed that each time after you wash it, you would wring the cloth, make sure all the drops of water comes out, right? After doing that, you wash it the second time, then you wring the cloth until all the drops of water come out, and then you do the third time, and then you wring it again until all the drops of water come out, right? That's how you would purify it.
Is it necessary for the stain to come out?
No, it's not necessary for the stain to come out. If that's the one thing, you should try to wash it in such a way where the stain is also removed. The main thing is the smell shouldn't be there. That's the main thing, basically, to purify it, and the smell shouldn't be there.
Yeah, because for example, blood
Yeah.
blood stain. So unless you are using soap, so as long as you clean it 3 times, wring it 3 times, technically now that has been purified.
Yeah. In essence, the way you would purify it is until the impurity is removed, you would wash it. Even if scholars say, even if that's done through washing it 1 time, but they specified a limit of 3 times because usually a cloth or your body or a piece of cloth becomes pure by washing it and wringing it 3 times. So it doesn't get it saying 3 times you should wash it, because usually through washing it 3 times, a cloth becomes pure. Now, if you wash it once and you've washed it really well, and now you're convinced that, okay, this is now purified, no trace of impurity is left on this cloth, then that will suffice as well. That will be considered to be purified. But usually, washing it 3 times will remove the impurity. This requires a little bit of explanation. I'll explain.
The main thing is the smell and the actual impurity, not the stain.
The actual impurity, right? That's the main thing. Not even the effect that it leaves behind, right? Because then again, it's categorized again into 2 more types, right? We mentioned different types of najasat ghaliza, right? We mentioned urine, for example, of a human being. That's najasat ghaliza. It's a heavy impurity. And similarly, the feces of a human being is also najasat ghaliza. But now there's a difference between these two. What is the difference? Is that one type has a physical body. The impurity with the physical body is, for example, like feces, or you have blood, for example. Since it is thick, you would consider that to be an impurity with the physical body. So, how would you wash this? What would be the method of washing it? There's no specific amount, right? For the urine, a urine is something which doesn't have, is not something which doesn't have a physical body. So scholars say you should wash it 3 times. Usually through washing it 3 times, the impurity is removed. But the impurity which has the physical body, like feces for example, you just have to remove the actual body of that impurity. If that's done once, then you can, but if it's purified by doing it once, then that'll suffice. You know, the cloth will be considered to be purified, right? So scholars mention it for those impurities with the physical body, right? The example of this is feces, right? And then there are the impurities without the physical body. Which is urine, right? And we discussed, usually the amount which is stipulated is you wash it 3 times. The affected area which has the impurity on it, you will wash it 3 times, right? Yes, now we discussed about if the impurity falls on your clothes or it ends up on your body. So now what happens if it ends up on, say for example, the person's shoes, right? And again, remember, we will discuss about these 2 in regards to the shoes as well, right? Impurities that have an actual body. The Arabic term, to make it easier, impurities that have a physical body in Arabic is described as mar'i. Mar'i is something which you can visibly see and it has an actual body, right? Right? Mar'i, for example, right? That's the one with the physical body. And the one that doesn't have a physical body is known as ghayr mar'i, right? So the first type, if that ends up on a person's shoes, or if it ends up on their leather socks, the method of removing it is you could just rub it on the floor. If the person has shoes on, and say for example he steps in feces for example, then that would be considered as najaasat, which is mar'i. There's an actual body to it. So what would you do? You would rub it, and you would keep rubbing it until the impurities fully removed from the shoe. That will suffice, and your shoe will become pure after doing that, right? Just scrape it off, right? Now, what if it's ghayr mar'i? What if it's something, for example, you step in urine? For this scenario, you will have to wash it, right? It won't suffice if you just scrape it or rub it on the floor, right? Because
shoes?
Huh?
You want shoes?
Shoes, yes, shoes.
Oh, you can. Nobody wash shoes.
Huh?
And
It's possible to wash it. The shoes, if you have, for example, like a water bottle with you.
You know what happened? The shoe has, like a, in the back there is a grooves in it. It's impossible unless you go with a heavy water in especially, yeah.
There are other ways you could do it. You could put a water bottle over it. You can wet a napkin. You can do it. There are ways to do it. It's possible.
The past days are like a dog, what you get. So we have to wash it with a tissue paper or go with the home and.
I mean, there is possibility for most shoes you can wash it with water if you step on your own.
Sneaker, we have like a groove on it,
Okay.
But a shoe is a shoe. It's not like obligatory for us to clean it off, right?
Yeah, yes, that's the thing.
We don't play with our shoes.
Yeah, it won't be obligatory if you're looking, but however, if you're praying with your shoes on, that's a whole other masala, praying with shoes.
Yeah.
So if they are impure, then you cannot pray with them. Right? So in that scenario, if you want to pray, and if there's impurity on your shoes, and you need to purify them, then this will be the method of purifying it. Right? Okay, so now, what if an impurity falls on the floor? If an impurity falls on the floor, on the ground, and that impurity dries up, right? And it dries up, and now there's no effect of that's there, right? There's no sign, there's no stain, and there's no smell of that impurity on the floor. Then what would be the ruling? That would be considered pure. A person can pray on it. However, a person will not be able to use that ground for tayammum, right? If it just became dry, the impurity became dry, and the effect of it completely wore off. The smell, the stain completely wore off. A person can pray on that, but he cannot do tayammum on that, right? It's pretty simple. So now, we mentioned this in the previous class, but again, just to revise, what if impurity falls on the carpet? Something which, you mentioned in the cloth, you would remove it, you would wash it, and then you would wring it, right? You would squeeze it until all the drops come out, but for carpet, that's not possible for us to do.
You would pour water on that area that's been affected, let it dry, and then do it twice more.
Yes. Again, as we mentioned in regards to mar'i and ghayr mar'i, Najaasat which has a physical body and Najaasat which doesn't have a physical body, that same ruling would also apply to the carpet. So if it's something which has a physical body, then you would make sure to remove that actual piece of impurity. For example, feces, if it falls on the carpet, then you would remove that, you would clean that off. And through doing that, the carpet would become purified. But now, the second type is what? Ghayr mar'i, something which doesn't have a physical body, like urine, for example. What you do, one of the methods, as Brother Omar mentioned, is you pour water on that spot, right? So say, for example, the spot is about this big. So you would take water equivalent to the size of the spot of the impurity, and you would pour it on the spot, right? And then you would wait, you let it dry, and you would pour it a second time, and you would wait, let it dry, and you would pour it a third time. Another way you could do it is, you can estimate the amount of water used to pour on that spot. So say, for example, if it's 1 liter, if the size of the impurity is such that you will pour 1 liter of water on it, and you will do that 3 times. So instead of doing it 3 times and after each time waiting for it to dry, what you could do is you could pour 3 liters of water on it at once, and you could wait for it to dry. Did we understand that?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned before, one method is?
How about if you put the water and then you whip it? Like, you try to...
You scrub it and you wipe it
scrub
clean?
it, yeah.
Again, the same thing is, usually it becomes clean by doing it 3 times.
Yeah, you have
But
to
if
do
we
that
clean it,
same
if we clean it in such a way where there's certainty that it has become purified, then even if it's done once, you will consider that to be purified. The main thing is that you need to have certainty that this spot is pure. Usually that's done by washing it 3 times. But if you could do that by washing it once, you wash it properly with soap and everything, you scrub it, and now there's no trace of that impurity there anymore, and you're fully convinced that there's no impurity on that spot, that it will be considered to be purified. So that is the ruling in regards to impurities, right?
Especially on the carpet, if we have to wait until it gets dry. It can
Yeah,
take
so that's
couple
why usually
hours. So
it's a long process. So
Yeah.
an easier way to do it would be to, however much water is needed to pour on that spot, you will multiply that by 3, and you could pour it all at once. Like I mentioned, if 1 liter of water is needed, so instead of pouring 1, then waiting, and then the second liter, and then waiting, and then the third, you could pour 3 liters of water on it at once. And then you could just wait for it to dry up, and then the spot would be considered to be pure. That covers the whole topic of Najaasat again. We mentioned that Najaasat is of 2 types. You have haqiqi, actual Najaasat which is visible, and then hukmi, which is being in a state of impurity. Each of those are divided into 2 types. Haqiqi is heavy impurity, ghaliza, and khafifa, light impurity. So that's haqiqi, right? And hukmi, the state of impurity is of 2 types as well. Hadith asghar, a minor, being in a state of minor impurity where you have to make wudu. And then hadith akbar, or being in a state of major impurity where you have to now perform ghusl in this scenario, right? So that is the whole breakdown of the topic of Najaasat. So inshallah, next week we will cover the topic of masa on leather socks.
What about on the body? If it falls on the body.
Same thing. If it falls on the clothes, the same ruling will apply for the body as
So the
well.
mar'i and the ghayr mar'i.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Same thing will apply for that. Any questions brothers have?
How about if it's not impurity, but like some kind of soap or some kind of syrup is found on the
That's fine.
carpet?
As long if it's not impurity, then that's fine. You can pray on that spot. Sometimes if there's like juice on the spot,
Yes,
if there's like a
that's-
stain there, then that's fine. As long as there's no impurity there, you
What
can pray on
about
the spot.
what about semen? What is that? Physical body without physical body?
That's physical body. Muddy. You consider it to be muddy.
What about a child's like droppings, like you're changing their pamper and they pee on you or something like that?
That would. I'm not sure if it's khafif or light impurity or major impurity. I'll find that out. I'm not sure.
And it's still a human, right? So it would be Beliza.
No, but
Yeah.
child is considered like pure, right? It's not like they need to do ghusl and things like that.
I'm not entirely sure. I'll find out if it would be considered light impurity or major. Any other questions, Brother Saf? Khair, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you, brothers, for coming. And again, next week we'll cover masa on leather socks.
Sure.